A predatory howl echoed through Whispering Pine Valley as a cold dawn crept over the rugged mountains. It wasn't an ordinary howl, it was the call of death. Rebecca Walker, alone on the harsh frontier, gripped the rifle leaning beside her cabin door. The last supply run before the brutal winter had just become infinitely more perilous. Would she make it back from this wilderness alive? 3 years out here had taught Rebecca to know that deadly call. Inside the log cabin, everything was in its place, the rifle well-oiled, ready. Tomorrow she had to set out for Fort Harrison Trading Post, a 4-day journey through treacherous territory. Failure to go meant this winter would likely be her last. Footsteps crunched outside. Jed Miller, the settlement's self-appointed leader, arrived with his tired warning. "Too dangerous for a woman alone, Ms. Walker," Rebecca replied coolly, the quiet authority in her voice honed by survival. "Supplies don't walk here on their own, Mr. Miller. And I believe we had this conversation yesterday." She knew their concern wasn't genuine. They resented the independence of a resolute widow who refused remarriage and insisted on doing men's work. Jed left, his frustration barely concealed. Night fell. Alone, Rebecca cleaned her rifle, her gaze drifting towards the warm glows of the nearby settlement. There was a time she'd tried to fit in, but she knew now she didn't belong there. This solitude, however harsh, was its own kind of freedom. At dawn, Rebecca set out before the settlement stirred. The heavy wagon groaned as it rolled away from the last log houses onto the lonely trail leading northwest. The first day passed with unnerving calm. But on the second day the sky changed. Angry clouds boiled over the distant peaks, the wind carrying the biting chill of coming snow. And then, Rebecca saw them. Wolf tracks pressed into the mud. Unnaturally large. More disturbingly, they didn't cross the trail. They paralleled it, heading in her direction. The pack was following. The feeling of being hunted became palpable, a cold dread snaking up her spine. Her horses grew skittish, ears pricked, nostrils flaring, sensing the danger. Snow began to fall, first as fine dust, then quickly thickening. Thompson's Crossing, the only safe way station, was still 3 hours away. Turning back to Clearwater was impossible. There was nothing for it but to press on. The trail narrowed, winding between sheer rock faces. The snow fell heavily now, visibility dropping to mere yards, sound muffled by the white curtain. Just as she needed maximum focus to guide the horses over a treacherous patch of loose rock, a gray shape blurred across the slope above. "Wolf!" Rebecca snatched up the rifle, the motion swift and sure, honed by reflex. Years ago, the sight would have sent her into a panic. Now there was only cold calculation. A lone wolf wasn't a threat. To someone prepared, but they rarely traveled alone. Others were surely hidden nearby. The next 20 minutes passed in taut silence. Rebecca navigated the wagon through the remainder of the narrow pass, her eyes constantly scanning the terrain. She spotted 2 more wolves, 3 total. They kept an unnerving distance, moving parallel to her, almost escorting rather than stalking. It was wrong. As the trail began to widen and descend towards Thompson's Crossing, a flicker of hope ignited in Rebecca. Perhaps the pack would break off as she neared civilization. But the hope died instantly. Cresting a small rise, the scene before her froze her blood. A massive pine tree, likely felled by the wind, lay directly across the trail. The only way through was completely blocked. Circling through the dense woods, and Rocky Scree would take hours, and darkness along with the blizzard was closing in. Rebecca halted the wagon, her mind racing. Moving the tree was impossible. Going around was too dangerous and time-consuming. She was trapped. Suddenly, the horses jerked violently against their harnesses, eyes wide with terror. Rebecca spun around to find the cause. Her blood ran cold. Standing squarely on the trail behind her wagon, blocking her only retreat, was an enormous wolf with a shimmering silver coat. It was impossibly large, bigger than any wolf she had ever seen or heard of. Its amber eyes stared at her, not with the hunger of a predator, but with a chilling, almost knowing intelligence. This was no ordinary wolf. Frontier whispers of the gray ghost, a legendary wolf of impossible size, leader of a pack capable of taking down full-grown bull elk or even bear, flashed through her mind. Most dismissed the tales as campfire exaggerations. But now, facing the creature blocking her path, Rebecca knew the legends were true. She slowly raised her rifle, calculating the shot. The silver wolf didn't flinch, just stood watching, almost curious. The standoff lasted several heart-stopping beats. Abruptly, the wolf tilted its head slightly as if listening to something only it could hear. Then Rebecca heard it too. Howls from the woods ahead, and behind, Gray Ghost had orchestrated his pack perfectly, using the fallen tree as a block, pinning her between them. This wasn't an opportunistic hunt. It was a coordinated tactic, executed with stunning intelligence. Rebecca's mind scrambled for options. The horses were too panicked to turn or break trail. The surrounding trees were too tall to climb. The wagon offered only temporary shelter. Darkness and the blizzard were fast approaching, conditions that would embolden the pack and obscure her vision. For the first time in years, real fear lanced through Rebecca's hardened defenses. Not panic. Panic killed faster than any predator, but the cold acknowledgement that she might have met a challenge beyond even her considerable survival skills. As if sensing this, Gray Ghost took a step forward. Still at a safe distance, but clearly signaling the hunt was entering its next phase. Rebecca braced the rifle against the wagon box, knowing every shot had to count. Wolves often fled from human firearms, but something told her this pack wouldn't be easily deterred. Movement on the slope above drew her attention. Expecting more wolves, Rebecca froze when she registered a different silhouette. The unmistakable shape of a human, moving downhill with startling speed. Hope flared for a microsecond, then died. No one from Clearwater would be this far out, and traders from Fort Harrison rarely traveled this route alone. The figure emerged from the trees, deepening Rebecca's astonishment. A man stood observing the standoff between her and the wolves, but he looked unlike any frontiersman she'd ever encountered. Tall and broad-shouldered, he was clad in leathers and furs that blended seamlessly with the mountain landscape. His face, partially obscured by a thick silver-dusted beard, was weathered, his eyes seeming to reflect the same wild awareness as the wolves themselves. Most striking were the creatures flanking him, 3 massive animals that looked more wolf than domestic dog, their muscular bodies tense and alert as they stood by their master. They made no sound, responding only to subtle hand signals the man gave without looking. Rebecca kept her rifle leveled, now unsure which was the greater threat, the wolves that had trapped her, or this mountain stranger and his inexplicable arrival. The man carried a rough-hewn spear in one hand and a handmade knife at his belt, but no firearm. For several tense moments nothing moved. Not Rebecca, not the stranger, not Gray Ghost, still watching from behind. The snow swirled ever thicker around them, lending an air of unreality to the scene. Then, without warning, the massive silver wolf turned its head towards the mountain man and made a sound unlike any wolf call Rebecca had ever heard. Almost a query, a greeting. What happened next defied everything Rebecca knew about wild animals and the boundaries of men. The mountain man stepped forward, emitting a low, guttural sound in his throat that mimicked the wolf's call. Gray Ghost's ears perked with interest, and incredibly, the giant predator sank onto its haunches, as if waiting. The man's dogs, or whatever they were, remained perfectly disciplined, neither advancing towards the wild pack nor showing aggression. They watched their master with absolute focus. Rebecca remained frozen in the wagon, rifle still raised, but her finger eased off the trigger as bewilderment replaced immediate fear. She was witnessing the impossible. A man communicating with the wild wolf pack that moments before had seemed poised to attack her. The mountain man took another step, looking directly at Rebecca this time. His eyes, startlingly blue against his weathered skin, held neither threat nor welcome, just an intense assessment that seemed to see right through her. "Lower the rifle," he said, his voice raspy from disuse, each word carefully formed. "They won't attack unless provoked." Rebecca held the gun steady, years of frontier caution warring with the strangeness of the moment. "That pack stalked me. For miles. They deliberately trapped me here." The man's expression didn't change, but a flicker of respect entered his eyes. "They did," he acknowledged. "But not for the reason you think." He gestured towards the darkening sky. "Storm's coming. A bad one. They smelled it 2 days ago." As if confirming his words, a sudden, violent gust of wind slammed snow into Rebecca's face with renewed force. The temperature was dropping rapidly as the storm system moved in, the early blizzard the folks back in Clearwater had been nervously discussing for weeks. The man pointed towards the fallen tree blocking the path. "That trail's no good now. It leads out into the open flats. You'd be caught exposed when the worst hits." Rebecca glanced between the man and the wolves, trying to process the situation. Gray Ghost remained seated, observing the interaction with unnerving intelligence. The other wolves she'd seen earlier had emerged from the tree line but kept their distance. "Who are you?" she finally asked, still not lowering the rifle. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "But if you want to live through the night, you need to come with me. Now." He indicated an almost invisible game trail leading off the main path. "My shelter's an hour's walk from here. As for these wolves," he gestured towards Gray Ghost, "they weren't hunting you. They were hurting you." "Hurting me?" Rebecca repeated, in disbelief. The man's weathered face cracked into something that might have been a smile, though it looked so unfamiliar Rebecca wasn't sure. "They do that sometimes," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "Storm's getting worse. Your choice. Stay here and freeze or follow me." As if to punctuate his warning, a blast of wind rocked the wagon, and the snow began falling in earnest, rapidly accumulating on the ground around them. The horses stamped nervously, sensing the swift deterioration of the weather. Rebecca Walker had survived 3 harsh frontier winters through careful preparation and self-reliance. She had learned to trust her instincts above all else. Those instincts now presented her with an impossible choice. Trust this strange mountain man with his wolf-like companions and apparent rapport with a wild pack, or face a blizzard alone in a completely compromised position. Gray Ghost rose, turned, and trotted a short distance down the hidden trail the man had indicated, before pausing to look back at them both. The mountain stranger gave a low whistle, and his 3 wolf dogs moved into position around the wagon. "Last chance," he said, already turning to follow the silver wolf. "Storm won't wait." Rebecca made her decision. She lowered the butt of the rifle, keeping it close at hand, while trying to secure the wagon as best she could. Whatever strange circumstances had brought this mountain man and his wolves across her path, survival now depended on trusting the unfolding mystery. The blizzard slammed into the mountainside with terrifying speed. Rebecca quickly gathered the most essential items from the wagon: rifle, ammunition, and a small survival pack she always kept ready. She unhitched the heavy harnesses from the nervously whinnying horses, keeping only simple lead ropes. "What? About the wagon?" she yelled over the howling wind. The man glanced at it, then at the bruised sky. "Leave it. Come back for it after the storm." Any other time, Rebecca would have argued. The wagon held months of the settlement's bartered goods, but years on the frontier taught her when survival trumped all else. She threw a tarp over the most valuable items, knowing it offered little protection against a mountain blizzard. The man moved with surprising agility, leading the way up the barely visible trail, unerring despite the worsening visibility. His 3 wolf dogs moved around them, occasionally vanishing into the swirling snow only to reappear. Gray Ghost and his pack had disappeared as quickly as they arrived, melting into the forest like phantoms. Rebecca led her horses through the increasingly difficult terrain, the snow already ankle-deep and drifting higher in wind-exposed areas. The animals became harder to manage as the temperature plummeted and the wind whipped ice crystals against exposed skin like needles. "They can't go much further in this," she called out to the man, who had paused to wait for her on a rise ahead. He looked at the horses, then at the raging sky, his face impassive. "Leave them. Leave them." Rebecca's voice rose in disbelief. "They'll die out here." He cut her off, his tone practical, not cruel. "Storm's worse than I thought. We need to move faster." Before Rebecca could protest further, he gave a sharp whistle. 2 of his wolf dogs immediately flanked the nervous horses. Remarkably, the horses calmed somewhat in their presence. "They'll lead your horses lower," the man explained, already turning back to the trail. "There's a system of natural caves near the creek. Better shelter than they'd find with us. They'll survive there." Trusting these wild-looking creatures, Rebecca realized she had no choice. The horses truly would slow them down, perhaps fatally. Reluctantly, she patted each horse's neck, murmuring reassurances she wasn't sure she believed herself. As she released the leads, the horses balked initially, but the 2 wolf dogs moved with such confidence that the horses fell in behind them as they began trotting down a diverging path. "They'll find us later?" Rebecca asked, watching her livelihood disappear into the whiteout. "Always do," the man replied, shouldering his spear and motioning for her to follow. "One stays with us. Come on, shelter's still a ways." Clutching her rifle and pack, Rebecca forced herself to focus on the immediate challenge, following the mountain man's tracks. The remaining wolf dog, the largest of the 3, now took the lead, breaking trail through the deepening snow. The wind screamed. Through the pines, the snow blew horizontally and visibility was down to a few feet. Without a guide, Rebecca knew she'd be lost in minutes. The sheer effort of the trek precluded conversation, not that the man seemed inclined towards it anyway. Rebecca observed him when she could. His movements were economical, wasting no energy. His knowledge of the terrain was evident in the way he navigated hidden obstacles beneath the snow, without hesitation. His clothing, which had seemed crude at first glance, now revealed its practical design. Layers of hide and fur crafted to shed snow and block wind. After what felt like an eternity, the led wolf dog abruptly veered off the faint trail they'd been following, heading towards what looked like a solid rock face sheltered by wind-battered pines. The man followed without pause, and Rebecca scrambled to keep up, the snow now halfway up her calves. As they drew closer, Rebecca saw that what she'd taken for a solid cliff face actually held a narrow fissure, almost invisible until they were upon it. The opening was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through sideways. The wolf dog disappeared into the darkness. The man followed, pausing only to ensure Rebecca was behind him. She hesitated at the entrance, ingrained caution, battling the certainty that remaining outside meant death in the worsening blizzard. The shrieking wind made the decision for her, blasting her with a gust of Arctic air that bit through her layers. Rebecca squeezed through the narrow opening, finding herself in near total darkness. 3 steps in. "Stop!" the man's voice echoed from ahead. Rebecca obeyed, her hand instinctively finding the cave wall beside her. The sudden absence of the storm's roar was unnerving, A spark flared in the darkness, then another, until a small flame caught on what looked like a crude torch. The man held it aloft, illuminating a narrow passage leading deeper into the mountain. "Close behind me," he instructed, ducking under a low overhang. "Watch your footing." The passage twisted several times before abruptly opening into a large cavern that took Rebecca's breath away. The space was larger than her cabin, with a high ceiling draped in small, ice-like stalactites. But what amazed her most was how it had been turned into a living space unlike anything she'd ever seen. There was a clearly defined sleeping area, with furs and woven blankets arranged on a raised platform of rock and wood. A fire pit sat in the center, cleverly vented through a natural chimney in the rock ceiling. Shelves had been hewn directly into the rock walls, holding an assortment of tools, weapons, and containers made from wood, stone, and hide. Most surprising was the far corner, where a natural spring bubbled up from the earth, forming a small pool before vanishing back into the rock through another fissure. The air within the cave was considerably warmer than outside and drier than Rebecca would have expected. The wolf dog shook itself vigorously, sending melted snow spraying onto the rock floor before lying down near the cold fire pit. The man immediately set about building a fire, his movements practiced and efficient. "You live here?" Rebecca finally asked, setting her pack and rifle near the entrance but keeping them within reach. "In winter," the man replied, not looking up from his task as tinder fungus and twigs began to catch. "Summer I move higher." Rebecca stood uncertainly, unsure of her place in this strange domain. Frontier etiquette dictated certain rituals between host and guest, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this. The man seemed either unaware or unconcerned by her awkwardness, focusing on getting the fire established before rising to retrieve something from one of the rock shelves. "Sit," he said finally, gesturing towards the fire pit. "Get warm." Rebecca hesitated only a moment before approaching the fire, its growing warmth pulling her closer despite her caution. She chose a spot where she could watch both the cave entrance and the mountain man, a habit born of years of frontier survival. "Your dogs," she began, looking at the large animal stretching out comfortably by the fire. "They aren't exactly dogs, are they?" The man paused in what he was doing, brewing some sort of tea in a crude but functional kettle. "No," he acknowledged, "not exactly dogs." When he didn't elaborate, Rebecca pressed, "And the wolves, especially the gray one, they seem to listen to you." "Ghost," the man said, putting a name to something for the first time. "Been in these mountains longer than me, longer than anyone. We have an understanding." He set the kettle beside the fire. "An understanding," Rebecca repeated, trying to make sense of what she'd witnessed. "I've never seen wolves behave like that. Organized, tactical, almost like they planned the whole thing." The mountain man looked at her across the firelight, his blue eyes reflecting the flames. "Because they did." The blunt statement left Rebecca momentarily speechless. Every instinct told her to dismiss the claim as frontier madness, the kind that sometimes touched men who lived alone too long in the wild. Yet she couldn't deny what she had seen with her own eyes. "You're saying the wolves deliberately herded me towards you because of the storm?" "Not towards me," he corrected. "Away from danger. The pass you were heading for, Devil's Pass. A storm like this, you'd have been buried under 20 feet of snow when the first avalanche hit." He poured the steaming liquid into 2 rough-hewn wooden cups. "They know the mountain's moods better than any man." He offered 1 cup to Rebecca. She hesitated before taking it, inhaling the strange, earthy scent mixed with pine and something sweeter she couldn't identify. "It's safe," he said, noticing her caution. "Pine needle tea, good for the cold." Rebecca took a tentative sip, finding the taste foreign but not unpleasant. The warm liquid immediately began to thaw the chill that had settled deep in her bones. during the trek. "What about my horses?" she asked, thinking of the animals led away by the other wolf dogs. "Safe. The lower caves stay warm year-round. Grass grows inside some of them, fed by the underground streams." He drank from his own cup. "Chitan and Maska know the ones." "Your dogs have names," Rebecca observed, latching onto this small piece of normalcy. "Not dogs," he corrected again. "Wolf dogs. Born wild, chose to stay with me." Rebecca absorbed this information, along with the first names she'd heard him speak. "Do you have a name then, or shall I just call you Mountain Man?" Something akin to amusement flickered in his eyes. "Some call me that." He paused, as if weighing the sharing of something valuable. "Holt. Nathan Holt." The name surprised her, sounding so ordinary for a man who looked anything but. "I'm Rebecca Walker," she responded, feeling the strange formality of introductions while sitting in a cave during a blizzard, drinking pine needle tea with a man who communicated with wolves. "I know," he replied, which startled her further. "The settlement talks?" "The settlement talks about me." Rebecca wasn't sure why this surprised her, though she knew she must be a topic of discussion in Clearwater. Nathan Holt set his cup down. "The woman who lives alone, hunts for herself, trades at Fort Harrison without a man's protection." His direct gaze held no judgment. "People notice strength when it's rare." Before Rebecca could respond to this unexpected assessment, a howl echoed from the cave entrance, clearly audible even over the raging storm. Nathan was instantly on his feet, moving towards the passage with silent steps. The wolf dog by the fire lifted its head but made no move to follow, clearly accustomed to this. Left alone by the fire, Rebecca took the opportunity to study her surroundings more closely. Though primitive in appearance, the cave dwelling showed signs of incredible ingenuity. The sleeping platform was positioned where the cave's natural thermal properties would offer maximum warmth. The storage areas were organized according to a system she didn't yet understand, but clearly followed some internal logic. Dried herbs hung from small crevices in the walls, while what looked like preserved meat was stored in the coolest section, away from the fire. Most intriguing were the small carvings she now noticed tucked into niches around the cavern. Surprisingly artistic wooden animal figures alongside the clearly functional, skillfully made tools. This wasn't the den of a savage who had rejected civilization, but the carefully maintained home of someone who had created his own civilization on different terms. Nathan returned a few minutes later, melted snow glistening in his beard. "Storms. Worsening. We'll be here at least 2 days." Rebecca absorbed this news with growing unease. 2 more days? The settlement would start to worry after tomorrow, but the settlement won't expect you back for 4 days minimum, he finished her thought. Trail should be passable enough by then. The accuracy of his assessment was unsettling. He had clearly calculated her travel time from Clearwater to Fort Harrison and back, knowing exactly when she'd be expected. Rebecca wondered what else this mountain man knew about her and the settlement. "Your horses are safe," he added, returning to his seat by the fire. "Chitan and Maska got them to the lower caves. They found grass and water." "You can know that already?" Rebecca asked skeptically. Nathan tapped his temple lightly. "I know. Same way I know when Ghost is hunting, or when the bear moved down from the high country." He stared into the flames. "Same way Ghost knew you needed warning about the storm." Rebecca clutched her cup, feeling simultaneously warmed by the fire and chilled by the implications of his words. "You're saying you can, what? Read animals' minds?" For the first time, Nathan Holt made a sound that might have been a laugh, though it sounded dry from disuse. "No, nothing magic. Just understanding. Been in these mountains 15 years. You learn the signs, the patterns. Animals are more honest than people. Their intent is clear if you know how to look. And my intent? Rebecca found herself asking. What did they tell you about that? His blue eyes met hers with a directness that seemed to pierce through her carefully constructed layers. That you're running from something. Not just living on the frontier. Hiding in it. The accuracy of his observation struck too close to secrets Rebecca kept buried beneath years of careful self-reliance. She looked away, uncomfortable with how easily this stranger had breached defenses that held against the most prying settlers. We all have our reasons for being out here, she deflected, suddenly very interested in the dregs in her cup. Nathan Holt didn't press, but his silence held an understanding that was almost more unnerving than questions would have been. He rose and went to one of the storage areas, returning with dried meat and what looked like preserved berries. Eat, he said, offering her a portion. Body needs strength. Storm's only just begun. As if to confirm his words, a particularly vicious gust of wind screamed across the mountain, its fury carrying even into the sheltered passage of the cave. The sound had such a primeval force that Rebecca instinctively moved closer to the fire, suddenly grateful for the solid rock surrounding them. Worst blizzard I went through was 2 winters back, she said, accepting the offered food. Snowed 3 days straight. We lost 2 families caught out returning from a hunt. Nathan nodded grimly. Remember it. This one's worse. Rebecca glanced towards the passage leading outside. You think so? Mountain tells me. He looked up towards the cave ceiling, where the faintest vibrations could be felt through the rock. Hear that? First avalanches are coming down off the high slopes. By morning, every pass between here and Fort Harrison will be blocked. The realization of how close she'd come to being caught in those conditions sent a shiver through Rebecca that had nothing to do with the temperature. If she'd continued on her intended route, or even tried to turn back towards Clearwater. The wolves saved my life, she said quietly, the truth finally settling in her mind. Ghost did, Nathan corrected. The others follow him. He's survived more winters than any wolf has a right to, knows these mountains better than any living thing. A peculiar reverence entered his voice. Some of the old trappers believed he wasn't really a wolf, but a mountain spirit in wolf form. And what do you believe? Rebecca asked, curious despite herself. Nathan's expression remained unreadable. I believe what I see and touch. Ghost is real. His choices are real. He poked the fire, sending sparks dancing upwards. Why he makes the choices he does, that's his business. As darkness deepened outside, the storm's intensity continued to build. Inside the cave, however, the dancing firelight cast shadows on the rock walls, creating a strangely secure atmosphere amidst the mountain's rage. Rebecca felt her initial fear replaced by a cautious curiosity about this solitary figure who moved between worlds, not entirely wild, yet clearly separate from the frontier's version of civilization. You mentioned summer camps higher up, she said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Do you ever go down to the settlements, Fort Harrison or Clearwater? Nathan added another log to the fire before answering. Twice a year, spring and fall. Trade for what I can't make. Powder, salt, metal for tools. His words were as economical as everything else about him. Prefer the quiet up high. Most people would call that loneliness, not quiet, Rebecca observed. His blue eyes caught the firelight as he looked up. Most people would be wrong. The mountains are never quiet if you know how to listen. And I'm rarely alone. The wolf dog raised its head at these words, as if acknowledging its part in the man's unusual existence. Rebecca realized the creature had been watching her silently ever since they arrived, its amber eyes holding an almost human intelligence. Night settled fully outside the cave. Though inside, Rebecca had lost all track of time. The blizzard continued, Its assault on the mountain, occasional gusts sending eerie whispers through the rock's ventilation channels. Nathan kept the fire steady, neither too large nor too small, exhibiting the same precise efficiency he seemed to apply to every aspect of survival. Rebecca sat cross-legged on a fur near the fire, her back against a smooth section of wall. The chill, warmth and relative security had allowed her muscles to relax for the first time since spotting the wolf tracks earlier that day. Now, with the immediate threat to her survival receded, her mind turned to understanding the extraordinary circumstances that had brought her here. "The settlement stories about you don't do you justice, do they?" she remarked, breaking the comfortable silence. Nathan looked up from the arrow shaft he was carefully fletching, his strong hands working the feathers with practiced precision. "People see what they expect to see. And what do they see when they look at you?" His hand stilled for a moment. "A hermit, a trapper, sometimes a boogeyman to frighten children." A slight shrug. "Depends on who's looking." "And what do the wolves see?" Rebecca pressed, curiosity overriding her usual caution. Nathan set the half-finished arrow aside, considering her question with unexpected seriousness. "Not threat, not prey." His gaze drifted towards the wolf dog lying nearby. At first they saw a hungry man who respected their skill and left offerings instead of competing. Later, he hesitated as if searching for words to explain something that existed beyond language. Later, they saw someone who moved by the mountain's rules, not man's. "Is that when Ghost approached you?" Rebecca asked, remembering the giant, silver wolf's strange behavior. 3 winters after I came here. A bad one. Game had moved lower. Found myself trailing the same deer as Ghost's pack. Nathan's eyes took on a distant look, recalling the memory. Figured I'd lose the hunt. 1 man against 8 wolves. But Ghost led the pack away, left the kill for me. Why would a wolf give up a kill? Rebecca couldn't hide her skepticism. "Didn't understand it myself then," Nathan admitted. "Left half. The meat is thanks. Figured they'd take it after I left. Came back the next day, meat was untouched and a freshly killed rabbit was left nearby." The wolf dog lifted its head, as if recognizing its role in the story. Nathan reached out absently to stroke its thick fur. Started as necessity, sharing hunting grounds, respecting territory. Became something else. Not friendship as humans know it, something older. Rebecca studied the man before her, seeing past the wild exterior to the intelligence that animated his features. "Is that when the wolf dogs joined you?" Udwat came first. Nathan nodded towards the large animal by the fire. Born to Ghost's pack, but different, curious about the human world. Started watching from a distance, then closer each time. His face softened fractionally. Found him injured, caught in a trapper's bear snare, nursed him back, he chose to stay. And the others? Chetan and Maska came 2 summers later. Wild-born but drawn to Adwait. Gradually accepted me as part of their unusual pack. A rare hint of affection touched Nathan's features. They move between worlds, same as me. Rebecca absorbed this extraordinary history, trying to reconcile it with her understanding of wild animals. Everything she knew about frontier survival cautioned against anthropomorphizing predators, yet she had witnessed the incredible communication between this man and the wolf pack firsthand. Does Ghost's pack ever come here? To the cave? Nathan shook his head. They stay wild, as they should. We share hunting grounds and warnings of the mountain's dangers, nothing more. He paused before adding, "Until today." What was different? About today? Rebecca asked, sensing something significant in his tone. Ghost has never directed his pack to interfere in human affairs before. Never herded a traveler away from danger. Nathan's steady gaze met hers. Not until you. The implication hung in the air between them, an unspoken question that neither seemed ready to address. Rebecca looked away first, uncomfortable with the weight of meaning in his words. Maybe it was just proximity, she offered practically. I happened to be in the storm's path. Nathan didn't argue, but something in his expression suggested he believed otherwise. He returned to his arrow, letting the conversation lapse into silence. Rebecca's thoughts turned to her horses, hoping they had indeed found safety in the lower caves Nathan mentioned. The animals represented not just her transportation, but a significant portion of her livelihood. Tell me about Clearwater Settlement, Nathan said unexpectedly, breaking into her thoughts. Surprised by his interest, Rebecca gathered her thoughts. It's small as frontier settlements go. 26 families at last count. Founded maybe 5 years now. Good water source, defensible position against potential raids, though we've had no trouble with the native tribes. And you've been there 3 years, he stated, rather than asked, confirming again his knowledge of her circumstances. Yes, I arrived with my husband, James. She hesitated, the familiar pang of loss catching briefly in her voice. He was military before we came west. Knew the frontier life, or thought he did. Fever took him our first winter there. And yet you stayed, Nathan observed. Most widows head back east or remarry quickly. Rebecca felt a familiar spark of defiance, the one that had carried her through countless similar observations from the settlers. I'm not most widows. For the first time, Nathan's face broke into something that looked like a genuine smile. It was brief, but transformative, revealing a younger man beneath the weathered exterior. No, he agreed softly. You're not. The unexpected warmth in that single word somehow softened Rebecca's defensiveness. James taught me everything he knew about survival before he passed. Hunting, tracking, basic defense. Said a woman alone on the frontier needed those skills more than any man. She traced a pattern on the fur beneath her fingers. The settlement thought I'd leave after the funeral. When I didn't, they assumed I'd accept one of the marriage proposals. When I refused those two, they decided I was either mad with grief or unnatural in my desire for independence. And did it get to you like that? Grief-stricken crazy? Rebecca considered the question honestly. Few people asked her something so directly. Yeah, at first, but grief doesn't sustain itself for 3 years. Eventually I realized I'd found something I never had back east. The freedom to decide my own path. Nathan nodded, understanding clear, in his expression. Mountains teach self-reliance, or they kill those who can't learn it. The settlement doesn't see it that way, Rebecca said, old frustration coloring her voice. They tolerate me because I'm useful. I teach the kids, handle basic medical needs, make these supply runs when most men won't risk it. But they never forget that I'm breaking their rules about how a woman's supposed to act. Rules matter less than results on the frontier, Nathan observed. Always believed that. But people bring their old world with them even here, Rebecca sighed. Maybe especially here, where they cling to familiar structures to fight off the wilderness. The wolf dog Adwat suddenly raised his head, ears pricked toward the cave entrance. Nathan stilled, head cocked slightly as if listening for something beyond human hearing. Rebecca tensed, instinctively reaching for her rifle. Chitan and Maska are back, Nathan said after a moment, relaxing. Horses are secured. As if summoned by his words, shadows moved in the passage, solidifying into the 2 wolf dogs she'd seen earlier. They entered the main chamber silently, shaking off snow before approaching the fire. Rebecca marveled at how different they looked from domestic dogs, despite the obvious connection to Nathan. Every movement radiated wild grace and barely contained power. Nathan greeted them with low sounds that mimicked wolf vocalizations. The animals responded in kind, creating a bizarre exchange that raised goosebumps on Rebecca's arms. Despite the cave's warmth, she watched intently as information seemed to pass between man and beast through this strange communication. "Your horses found the cave easily," Nathan translated, turning to Rebecca. "They're settled. Spring water and graze. Inside will sustain them until the storm passes. You understood all that from the noises they made?" Rebecca couldn't hide the skepticism in her voice. Nathan regarded her with his earlier patience. "Not just from the noises, from knowing these mountains, these animals, and what they would have encountered along the way." He gestured towards the wolf dogs now settling down near the fire. Chetan smells of horse sweat, but no blood or fear. Maska entered with confidence, no warnings of new dangers. Their body language tells me the task was completed without incident. Put that way, the explanation seemed almost logical rather than mystical. Rebecca found herself reevaluating her initial impression of Nathan Holt. His connection to the wolf pack wasn't some supernatural communion, but the result of years of careful observation and adaptation. "You learned their language," she said, with dawning understanding. "And they learned mine," he corrected. "Goes both ways. Has to survive." Outside, the blizzard reached new intensity, its howl penetrating even the thick cave walls. The sound reminded Rebecca of their precarious situation, trapped in a mountain cave with a stranger while nature's fury raged outside. "How long have you lived like this?" she asked, genuinely curious now about the path that had led this clearly intelligent man to such a singular existence. Nathan added several logs to the fire before answering, his movements deliberate as he arranged them for optimal burning. "Came to these mountains 15 years ago, intended to trap for a season then return east." His expression didn't reveal whether he considered this change of plans fortunate or not. "First winter taught me how little I knew. Nearly died twice, before I learned a proper respect for the mountains." "What brought you west in the first place?" Rebecca pressed, sensing there was more to his story. Nathan's face closed off slightly, reminding her that despite their unusual circumstances, they were still strangers with boundaries. "War," he said simply, in a tone that discouraged further inquiry on the subject. Rebecca recognized that shut-down expression. She'd seen it in James and other veterans carrying memories they preferred not to revisit. Respecting Nathan's clear desire to avoid the topic, she changed direction. "How did you find this cave? It seems perfectly suited for habitation, yet almost invisible from the outside." The tension in his shoulders eased a bit at the change of subject. "Followed a wounded elk for 3 days straight during an early winter storm. The animal led me here, probably seeking shelter itself." Nathan glanced around the cave, a touch of pride evident in his appraisal. "Took 2 years to make it truly habitable. Chiseled ventilation shafts for the fire's smoke, built the sleeping platform above the cold floor, figured out how to store food safe from scavengers." Rebecca studied the cave with a newfound appreciation for the work that had gone into transforming it. "It's remarkable. I've never seen anything like it. Many caves in these mountains," Nathan replied with characteristic understatement. "Some better than others. This one has natural heat from hot springs below, good ventilation, multiple exits." "Multiple exits?" Rebecca's survival instincts immediately registered the significant detail. Nathan nodded toward the back of the cave where the shadows were deepest. 3 separate passages. One leads down to the horses. One climbs to an observation point. Third connects to a larger cave system that can be navigated in an emergency. The strategic advantages of such a setup weren't lost on Rebecca. This wasn't simply a shelter, but a defensible position with escape routes. The abode of someone who understood both the wilderness and the threats posed by humans. "You've had trouble with others before," she observed. "Trappers or traders?" A glint of steel flashed in Nathan's eyes. "Occasionally. Some see the wilderness as something to conquer rather than respect. They take without understanding limits. And, when they trespass on your territory, I encourage them to reconsider their path." His tone remained neutral, but Rebecca sensed the dangerous undercurrent lurking beneath the measured response. "Most do. Once they understand the mountain doesn't favor them." The understatement wasn't lost on her. Whoever Nathan Holt had been, before he came to these mountains, he was clearly capable of defending his domain when necessary, yet he'd chosen to help rather than harm her when their paths crossed. A distinction that spoke to character rather than ability. As night settled in, Rebecca felt the exhaustion of the day's events seep into her bones. The fire's warmth and the relative safety of the shelter made her eyelids heavy despite her usual vigilance in unfamiliar places. Nathan noticed her struggle to stay awake. Without comment, he went to the sleeping platform and arranged several animal hides into a comfortable-looking mattress, then gestured toward it. "Get some rest. I'll keep the fire." Rebecca hesitated, ingrained caution warring with practical need. "What about you? Sleep comes in snatches during a storm," he replied, returning to his seat by the fire. "Mountains talk loudly at times like this. Best to listen." Under normal circumstances, Rebecca would never consider sleeping in the presence of a stranger, especially one as enigmatic as Nathan Holt. But these circumstances were far from normal, and her instincts, which had kept her alive for 3 years on the frontier, told her she faced no immediate threat from this unusual man. "Thank you," she said simply, going to the sleeping platform. She chose a position where she could observe the main chamber, rifle within easy reach. A compromise between trust and prudence. The animal hides were surprisingly soft and free of the gamey odor common to the wilderness, suggesting regular care and cleaning. Rebecca sank into their warmth, watching through half-closed eyes as Nathan continued to work on arrow fletchings by the fire, his calloused hands working with a gentle precision that belied his somewhat intimidating appearance. True. Wolf dogs arranged themselves around the chamber. Adwat remained near Nathan, while Chetan and Maska positioned themselves near the cave entrance, alert for any changes in their surroundings. The scene struck Rebecca as primally familiar, as if she were witnessing a living tableau from humanity's distant past when the first partnerships between humans and wolves were forged in similar caves against similar winter storms. As sleep began to claim her, Rebecca's last thought was that perhaps she understood Nathan Holt better than she initially realized. They weren't so different. Two souls who had found in the wilderness a freedom denied in civilization, each adapting to its harsh demands in their own way. Their methods might differ, but the reasons resonated with the same chord. The storm continued to batter the mountain throughout the night, but within the protective embrace of the cave, Rebecca slept more deeply than she had in years, guarded by a man who spoke to wolves and sentinels who had chosen to share his solitary path. She dreamed she was running through moonlit forests, not in fear, but in exhilaration, her feet barely touching the ground as she moved with the fluid grace of a wolf. Beside her were shadowy companions, neither fully human nor fully beast, but something in between, creatures of the liminal spaces who understood both worlds without fully belonging to either. And ahead, a massive silver wolf led the way, its fur shimmering like metal in the dream light, guiding her towards a place she couldn't yet see but instinctively understood was important. The dream shifted, and suddenly she stood on the edge of a cliff overlooking the Clearwater settlement far below. The buildings looked like toys from this height, the people moving between them like ants following invisible trails. She felt a presence beside her, not threatening but watchful, patient. When she turned, the mountain man stood there, his blue eyes reflecting the boundless sky. "They can't see what we see from up here," Dream Nathan said, his voice devoid of its usual gravel. "The order of it," he said, gesturing to the horizon that seemed to stretch forever in every direction. "How things connect, how small their walls are against the truth of the mountain." She jerked awake, the dream dissolving like morning mist, leaving only a lingering sense of meaning she couldn't quite grasp. The cave was quieter now, the storm's fury somewhat abated, though still very much present. The fire burned low but steady, casting a gentle light across the stone walls. Nathan sat in his former position, his back against the wall, eyes closed, but his posture suggesting alertness rather than sleep. The wolf dogs had rearranged themselves, only Maska still maintaining a vigil at the entrance, while the others dozed near the fire's warmth. As if sensing her return to consciousness, Nathan opened his eyes, his gaze meeting hers across the dim chamber. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of shared space and circumstance that transcended their brief acquaintance. Then he nodded once, a simple recognition of her presence, before rising to tend to the fire as a new day began in their stone sanctuary, while the blizzard continued its siege outside. Morning arrived without the usual lightening of the cave. The storm raged unabated, blanketing the mountains in layers of snow that would reshape trails and alter familiar landmarks. Rebecca stirred awake, briefly disoriented by her unfamiliar surroundings until the memories flooded back. The wolves, the mountain man, the blizzard that had driven them all to this stone sanctuary. Nathan was evidently already up and about, tending fresh wood on the fire and the aroma of something cooking in a crude stone pot. The wolf dogs had repositioned themselves around the cave. Adwat was now gone, presumably out on patrol despite the weather. "Storm's changing," Nathan remarked without preamble, as Rebecca rose and folded the animal hides she'd slept upon. "Shifting to ice. More dangerous." Rebecca moved closer to the fire, accepting a wooden cup filled with something that resembled a broth. The liquid tasted richly of game meat, with strange herbs that left a pleasant tingle on her tongue. "How can you tell? The storm's changing from in here?" she asked after a few warming sips. "Sound changes," he replied, cocking his head slightly as if demonstrating the posture of listening. "Wind has a higher pitch, means colder air moving in from the northwest. Creates ice on top of the new snow. Very treacherous to travel, deadly, for most animals." Rebecca weighed this assessment against her own knowledge of frontier weather. James had taught her the basics, but Nathan's understanding was deeper, born of years of direct observation rather than second-hand learning. "What does that mean for our situation?" she asked pragmatically. "Means we wait longer." Nathan stirred the pot over the fire. "An ice storm can last a day after the snow stops falling. Moving too soon means broken legs for the horses or worse." Rebecca frowned, mentally calculating the extended absence against the settlement's expectations. "Clearwater will worry if I'm gone too long. They might send a search party." Nathan's expression remained impassive, but something like concern flickered in his eyes. "Search parties in these conditions will only get themselves into trouble. Can't track under the new snow, and ice makes every slope a death trap." "I know that," Rebecca conceded. "But the settlement council doesn't understand mountain weather like—" She stopped herself before saying "we," startled by how quickly she was aligning herself with this man rather than her community. If Nathan noticed her hesitation, he didn't. Show it. When the weather clears, I'll help you retrieve your wagon and guide you back to the main trail. Until then, waiting is our only option." The simple logic was irrefutable, but Rebecca felt a restlessness that had little to do with the cramped space. Being on another's territory, dependent on their knowledge and resources, went against the fierce self-reliance she'd cultivated since James's death. Seeking to regain a sense of agency, she asked, "Is there anything I can do to help while we wait? I'm not used to sitting idle." Nathan considered her question with the same gravity he applied to every issue. Supplies need reorganizing. Winter stores were damaged when a stream flooded part of the storage cave last month. Rebecca welcomed the practical task, following Nathan into a narrow passageway that opened into a smaller cavern with shelves carved into the stone. Here Nathan's stores were kept in a variety of containers. Many showed signs of water damage, needing to be dried or repacked. Working together, they fell into a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. Nathan's system of organization was different from Rebecca's, but no less logical, grouping items by seasonal use rather than type, with the most essential supplies kept in the most easily accessible locations. She found herself admiring his efficient arrangement, recognizing the years of experience and refinement it represented. "You mentioned a war," Rebecca said carefully as they worked, testing to see if the daylight hours made Nathan more willing to discuss his past. "Was that the conflict with Mexico?" Nathan continued sorting dried berries without looking up. "Before that, Creek War, then the Seminole campaigns." His tone remained neutral, recounting facts rather than memories. "Served under Jackson, then Scott." Rebecca paused her work, doing a quick calculation in her head. Those conflicts had ended nearly 20 years ago, making Nathan older than she had initially estimated. His weather-beaten appearance was due not only to exposure to the elements, but to the accumulation of more years and experiences than she had realized. "You were very young then," she observed, careful to keep her tone conversational rather than probing. 15 when I enlisted, lied about my age." A ghost of something dark flickered across his features. "Old enough to kill, they decided." The simple statement carried a weight far beyond its words. Rebecca recognized the voice of someone who had witnessed too much death too early. A burden she had witnessed in James during his darker moments, when the memories of his own military service rose to the surface. "James, my husband, served later on," she offered, creating a bridge of shared experience between them. "He said the hardest part wasn't the fighting, but coming back to a world that expected you to forget what you'd seen and done." Nathan's hand stilled for a moment, a small but significant gesture from a man whose movements were always deliberate. "Your husband understood? Is that why you stayed in the mountains? Because you couldn't go back?" For one long moment, Rebecca thought she had gone too far. Nathan resumed his work, his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was deeper than usual. "Tried to go back. Worked as a surveyor, then a guide for settlers heading west. Found I couldn't sleep in towns anymore. Too many people, too much noise." He secured a bundle of dried meat before continuing. "The dreams were bad. Out here, the dreams changed, became something I could live with." The admission, however brief, represented a significant sharing from someone who clearly valued his privacy. Rebecca accepted it with the respect it deserved, offering no platitudes or further questions. They continued to work in comfortable silence until a sudden commotion at the cave entrance drew their attention. Adwat had returned, shaking ice crystals from his thick fur. More surprisingly, he was accompanied by the massive form of Ghost, the silver wolf, standing just inside the passage with snow melting from its coat. Nathan moved towards the main chamber instantly, his posture alert but not panicked. Rebecca followed more cautiously, again struck by the sheer size of the wolf. Standing in the confined space of the cave, Ghost appeared even larger than it had on the trail, its shoulder nearly at her waist, its powerful body radiating wild strength. The wolf's amber eyes followed their movements, lacking the wariness that wild animals usually displayed in proximity to humans. Instead, it possessed the confident air of someone visiting familiar territory, though it maintained a respectful distance from the fire. Nathan emitted the low sounds Rebecca had heard him use with the wolf dogs. Ghost responded with a snort, then turned its massive head towards the cave entrance, ears pricked. "More storm coming," Nathan translated, his expression grim. "Ghost never comes inside unless the weather turns truly dangerous. He's warning us." Rebecca couldn't hide her astonishment. "Warning and seeking shelter," Nathan corrected. "When Ghost comes inside, the mountain is speaking with its harshest voice." As if to confirm this assessment, a new sound penetrated the cave walls. The low, reverberating rumble of distant avalanches cascading down from higher elevations. Rebecca felt the vibrations through the stone floor, a primal reminder of nature's overwhelming power. "The path I was following," she began, understanding dawning, "is buried now," Nathan finished. 20 feet deep in some places, unsurvivable. The realization of how close she had come to death sent a chill down Rebecca's spine that had nothing to do with temperature. Without Ghost's intervention and Nathan's guidance, she would have vanished beneath tons of snow and ice, her fate unknown to the settlement until the spring thaw revealed what remained. Ghost moved further into the cave, circling once before, lying down near the passage that led to the deeper cave system. The other wolf dogs kept a respectful distance, acknowledging its dominant presence without challenge. "How long has it been doing this?" Rebecca asked, unable to take her eyes off. The magnificent animal. 10 years, only during the worst storms. Nathan added wood to the fire. "First time was a surprise for both of us. Found him at the entrance, near frozen after a 3-day ice storm. Let him warm up. Figured he'd leave when the weather cleared. But he came back." Nathan nodded. "Next big storm, he appeared again. Established a pattern. He shelters here when he needs to. I respect his presence, he respects mine. The arrangement works, and the settlement has no idea the legendary Gray Ghost is a frequent visitor to your cave," Rebecca observed with a hint of irony. "They'd never believe it." "People believe what fits their understanding," Nathan replied. "Easier to imagine me as a crazy hermit than someone who's found different truths." The philosophical bent in his answer surprised Rebecca, revealing depths to this mountain man that belied the simple life he seemed to live. Again she found herself reevaluating her initial impressions, recognizing that Nathan Holt's isolation was a choice born of wisdom, rather than an inability to fit into society. As the day wore on, the storm worsened as Nathan had predicted. Ice crystals formed at the cave entrance, creating delicate patterns that caught the firelight. The distant rumble of avalanches became more frequent, confirming the wisdom of having sought shelter when they did. Rebecca found herself studying Ghost when she thought the wolf wasn't looking. Everything about the animal challenged her understanding of wild predators. It maintained a clear sense of the space it occupied, never venturing too close to the fire or the sleeping area, yet showed none of the restless pacing of captive creatures. Its presence carried a tangible intelligence, observing, assessing, communicating in ways that surpassed her frontier education. "The settlement tells stories about a silver wolf that has lived in these mountains for generations," she said, recalling fireside tales she had previously dismissed as exaggerations. "They say it can't be killed by bullet or trap, that it understands human speech and takes vengeance on hunters who violate the unwritten rules of the mountain." Nathan glanced at Ghost, who seemed to be resting with eyes half closed. Legends grow from seeds of truth. Ghost has survived situations that would kill ordinary wolves. Hunters who have tried to take him have met with unfortunate accidents. Accidents? Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Falls from narrow trails, equipment malfunctions, sudden storms that caught them unprepared. Nathan's expression remained neutral. The mountain has many ways to teach respect. And you've never been tempted? A pelt like that would fetch a considerable trade value. A flicker of steel flashed in Nathan's eyes. Some things have value beyond commerce. Ghost is one of them. Rebecca nodded, understanding that she had touched upon something fundamental in Nathan's worldview. I didn't mean to offend. I'm testing a hypothesis. Which is? That whatever brought you to this mountain, whatever keeps you here separate from the settlements and towns, has to do with finding value in things others would exploit without a second thought. Nathan regarded her in silence for a long moment, his blue eyes mirroring the firelight. Your husband taught you to track and hunt. What else did he teach you? To observe people the way you observe animals, Rebecca replied honestly. James said understanding human motives was as important to survival as any physical skill. A ghost of a smile touched Nathan's lips. He was right. They were interrupted by Ghost's sudden alertness, the large wolf rising to its feet, its attention focused on the cave entrance. Nathan straightened, his head cocked in his characteristic listening posture. Rebecca instinctively reached for her rifle, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, even though she couldn't identify the cause. Someone's coming, Nathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. In this storm? Impossible, Rebecca protested. Not impossible. Desperate. He moved silently towards the narrow entrance, Ghost and Adwit flanking him, while the other wolf dogs positioned themselves protectively near Rebecca. Heart-pounding, Rebecca checked her rifle again, ensuring it was loaded and ready. Few legitimate travelers would be on the mountain in these conditions, leaving worrying possibilities. Desperate trappers, outlaws seeking shelter, or perhaps a search party from Clearwater foolish enough to set out despite the weather. Nathan disappeared into the passage, moving with the soundless grace she had noticed during their journey to the cave. Ghost followed, a silver shadow melting into the darkness, while Adwat remained at the entrance, vigilantly guarding against potential threats. The minutes stretched on endlessly, as Rebecca waited, straining her ears for any sound beyond the wolf dog's steady breathing and the crackle of the fire. When Nathan finally returned, his expression grim, melting snow glistening on his beard. 2 men, he reported, keeping his voice low. Trappers, judging by their gear, caught in the storm and following the rock face looking for shelter. How close were they to finding the entrance? Rebecca asked, mentally calculating how 2 more people would strain the cave's resources if they had to take them in. Close enough to be dangerous. Cave entrance is concealed, but desperate people see what others miss. The unspoken question hung between them. What to do with these uninvited guests? Rebecca recognized the dilemma. Frontier morality dictated offering shelter to those endangered by the weather, but strangers represented an unknown threat, especially to a man who valued his privacy and a woman traveling alone. We could lead them to one of the other caves you mentioned, Rebecca suggested. Provide them with shelter without revealing this place. Nathan considered this, the calculation evident in his eyes. Possible. Risky in these conditions. Ice makes even short journeys treacherous. What does your gut tell you about them? They're scared, he replied without hesitation. One is injured, walking with a bad limp. Poorly equipped for mountain winter. Made a lot of mistakes before the storm hit. Rebecca weighed this assessment against her own frontier experience. So, greenhorns. Not the hardened outlaw type. Unlikely. But fear makes people unpredictable. Nathan glanced towards Ghost, who had returned to the main chamber but remained focused intently on the passageway. Ghost doesn't trust them. The simple statement carried a weight far beyond its words. Rebecca had seen enough to respect the wolf's judgment, having benefited from it herself. "What do you propose?" she asked, deferring to Nathan's greater knowledge of the territory. Nathan's expression remained unreadable as he considered the options. "I'll approach them openly, offer to lead them to the lower cave where your horses are stabled. Better for everyone if they don't know about this place. And if they refuse your help, or prove to be dangerous?" A cold glint appeared in Nathan's eyes, a reminder that beneath his measured demeanor lay a man perfectly capable of defending his territory. "Then Ghost and I will ensure they find another path." The implied threat wasn't lost on Rebecca, nor did it alarm her. Frontier justice operated on the principles of necessity in ways different from the laws of the East. Survival sometimes demanded hard choices. "I'll go with you," she decided, already reaching for her coat. "They'll be less suspicious. A woman's presence might make them more willing to accept your guidance rather than demanding to know what you're protecting." Nathan studied her with renewed appraisal. "Clever, but dangerous if they're truly desperate." "Life on the frontier is dangerous," Rebecca replied simply. "I'd rather face it prepared than cower from it." After a moment's consideration, Nathan nodded, accepting her logic. "Then we approach together, but you follow my lead, stay behind me, and if I signal you to retreat, I'll retreat," Rebecca promised, though they both recognized the steel beneath her tone of agreement. This was a woman who had survived 3 years alone on the frontier. She would make her own assessment of the danger as they proceeded. Nathan prepared for the weather outside, adding layers of fur and hide for protection against the bone-chilling cold of the ice storm. Rebecca did the same with her own clothing, grateful for the practical design of frontier garb that prioritized function over the constricting fashions women endured back east. As they prepared to venture out, Ghost approached Rebecca, its massive body blocking her path momentarily. The silver wolf regarded her with those unsettling amber eyes, intelligence blazing in its gaze. Then, to her astonishment, it lowered its head slightly, not in subservience, but in a gesture that seemed remarkably like acknowledgement before stepping aside. Nathan had witnessed the exchange, his expression etched with rare surprise. "He's never done that before," he murmured. "Not to anyone but me." "What does it mean?" Rebecca asked, her heart pounding from the encounter. Nathan's gaze held an intensity that matched the wolf's. "It means the mountain has made its choice about you, Rebecca Walker. And now, we have to deal with whatever is waiting outside." The world outside the cave had transformed into an icy nightmare. Every surface glistened with ice, beautiful and deadly in the fading light. Trees groaned under the weight of frozen snow, branches cracking ominously in the wind. The ground was treacherous, a sheet of ice overlaying the drifts of snow beneath, creating surfaces that could collapse at any moment. Nathan moved with practiced caution, each footstep tested before weight was committed. Rebecca mirrored his movements, grateful for the sturdy boots James had insisted on having custom made for her before their journey west. The wolf dog, Adwait, accompanied them, moving with astonishing agility across the icy terrain, while Ghost remained behind to guard the cave with Chetan and Maska. They moved in silence, sound carrying dangerously far in the frozen landscape. Nathan led them along the rock face in a wide arc, approaching the trappers from above rather than directly, observing before being observed, assessing before making contact. When they finally spotted the men, Rebecca understood Nathan's caution. The two trappers huddled miserably beneath a makeshift shelter of pine boughs, their fire struggling against the weather. One man was visibly injured, his leg wrapped in a crude bandage that had already soaked through with blood. The other paced, nervously, stopping occasionally to scan the rock face with desperate attention. Their gear spoke of inexperience, inadequate for a mountain winter, their supplies clearly dwindling. These were not seasoned mountain men, but opportunists who had ventured beyond their knowledge, lured by tales of abundant beaver and wolf pelts in the high country. Eastern tenderfoots playing at frontier survival, Rebecca whispered. The assessment, harsh but accurate. Nathan nodded once, his eyes assessing entry points and potential threats. The injured man clutched a rifle in his lap, while the pacing trapper had a pistol holstered on his belt, both weapons of questionable functionality, due to the damp and freezing conditions, but still dangerous if they could be made to work. I'll approach openly, Nathan decided, his voice barely above the wind. You stay hidden here until I signal. If anything goes wrong, return to the cave immediately. Rebecca wanted to argue, but recognized the wisdom in his plan. Her presence might complicate the initial encounter, especially if the men reacted poorly to Nathan's appearance, his bearded face and fur-clad frame likely looking more like a bear than a man to unprepared eyes. Be careful, she said simply, positioning herself behind a large boulder that provided both concealment and a clear view of the scene below. Nathan started down the slope, deliberately making noise so the trappers would hear his approach before seeing him. It was a calculated move. Surprising desperate people often triggered violent reactions. The pacing trapper whirled towards the sound, his hand dropping to his pistol but not drawing it as Nathan emerged from behind the trees. The injured man struggled to raise his rifle but lacked the strength to aim it properly. Hold your fire, Nathan called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone at ease in the wilderness. I mean you no harm. Rebecca watched the scene unfold, noting that Nathan had adjusted his demeanor, keeping his hands in plain sight, his posture non-threatening despite his imposing size. He had even modulated his speech using a more clear, educated tone. Who are you? The pacing trapper demanded, his accent indicating he was from near Boston. Where'd you come from in this goddamn storm? Name's Holt, Nathan replied, stopping, at a respectful distance. I live in these mountains, spotted your fire and came to offer help. The injured man lowered his rifle, relief evident on his face despite the pain he was clearly in. Thank God. We've been stranded for 2 days. Jimmy's leg got caught in our own damn trap when the storm hit. A beginner's mistake. That leg needs proper care, Nathan observed, glancing at the blood-soaked bandage. I can lead you to shelter, help tend the wound. The pacing trapper, presumably Jimmy, remained suspicious. Why would some mountain hermit help strangers? What's your angle? Nathan's expression didn't betray the calculation that Rebecca knew was taking place in his mind. No angle. Mountain law. Provide shelter for those in need during a storm. You'd do the same. It was a clever appeal, creating a social obligation they would find it difficult to refuse. The injured man understood immediately. Sure thing, he said, giving his companion a warning look. I'm Peter Davis. This skeptical fool is Jimmy Richardson. We appreciate any help you can give us, Mr. Holt. Nathan nodded once, then gestured towards the hillside. There's a cave about half a mile, that way. Tough going with that leg, but better than freezing to death out in the open. Jimmy remained wary. You all alone up here? Seems strange, a man in the mountains in winter. The question carried a hint of menace, assessing whether Nathan might be easy prey. Rebecca tensed behind the rock. Not alone, Nathan replied evenly. Have companions who can help carry your friend if need be. The deliberate ambiguity was masterful. The trappers would assume human companions while Nathan was only stating the truth. His wolf dogs were indeed capable of helping transport the injured man. Jimmy opened his mouth to press the issue when a distant rumble cut him off. The unmistakable sound of another avalanche cascading down from the high country. All three men instinctively looked towards the sound, a primal reminder of the mountain's lethal power. "Storm's getting worse," Nathan said, his tone urgent. "Need to move now if you're going to. Cave's safe from avalanches. This place isn't." The imminent threat outweighed Jimmy's suspicion. Together they helped Peter to his feet, the injured man wincing in pain. Nathan whistled softly, and a Dweet emerged from the tree line, causing both trappers to start back in surprise. "What the hell is that?" Jimmy demanded, his hand resting firmly on his pistol. "One of my companions," Nathan replied calmly. "He won't harm you unless you threaten us." Rebecca recognized her cue and stepped out of her hiding place, moving deliberately and non-threateningly. The look of astonishment on those trappers' faces at the sight of a woman would have been funny in other circumstances. "This is Rebecca," Nathan introduced her without further explanation. "She can help tend to your leg, Peter, once we get you to shelter." The presence of a woman instantly changed the trapper's demeanor. Jimmy's hand left his weapon while Peter tried to straighten up despite the pain. The frontier might be lawless in many ways, but certain social conventions still held strong. "Ma'am," Peter managed a polite nod. "Didn't expect to find a lady up here in the mountains." Rebecca offered a pragmatic smile. "Didn't expect to find trappers in the high country in winter either. Let's get you somewhere warm before we discuss the surprises." With the initial tension eased, they began the arduous trek toward the lower cave Nathan had mentioned. He'd decided against bringing these strangers to his primary dwelling, a precaution Rebecca fully supported. This cave would provide the necessary protection without revealing the secrets of Nathan's true home. The journey was grueling. Peter could barely walk even with Jimmy's support, and the icy terrain threatened a dangerous fall with every step. Eventually, Nathan fashioned a crude litter from pine branches and his outer fur coat, allowing them to carry Peter more effectively. By the time they reached the entrance to the lower cave, it was nearing dusk, and the temperature had plummeted. The cave mouth was larger than Nathan's hidden dwelling, easily visible on the rock face and evidently used by other travelers from time to time, judging by the old fire rings near the entrance. Rebecca's horses whinnied in recognition as they entered, confirming this was indeed where the wolf dogs had led them. The animals looked relatively comfortable, finding natural graze around the spring water and sheltered from the worst of the weather. "You weren't kidding about the cave, Jimmy," remarked, helping to lower Peter onto a relatively flat patch of ground near where they would make a fire. "How'd you find this place?" "Mountains reveal their secrets to those who know how to look," Nathan replied, already gathering tinder from a small woodpile stored deeper inside the cave, testament to his foresight in maintaining multiple shelter options. Rebecca immediately turned her attention to Peter's injured leg, her frontier medical experience making her the most qualified to assess the damage. Carefully unwrapping the blood-soaked bandage, she revealed a deep puncture wound consistent with a trap injury that already showed alarming signs of infection. "How long ago did this happen?" she asked, keeping her tone professional. 2 days, Peter admitted, wincing as she examined the wound. "Maybe 3. Lost track of time in the storm." "The trap was yours?" she confirmed, retrieving clean cloth from her pack to make a new bandage. Peter nodded miserably. "Set it for wolves, but forgot the exact location once the snow started covering everything. Stepped right into it like a greenhorn." Rebecca exchanged a look with Nathan, both recognizing the irony. A wolf trap injuring its setter, while the wolves themselves played a crucial role in saving the others from the storm. Infections setting in she told Peter honestly. Needs to be cleaned, properly medicated, and rested. Even then you risk losing the leg if the infection spreads. Jimmy paled at her assessment. We're 5 days from the nearest settlement if the weather's perfect. Fort Harrison's closer, Rebecca corrected. 3 days in good conditions. But no one's traveling until this storm breaks and the snow settles. So, we're stuck here? Jimmy asked, a hint of panic creeping into his voice. You're sheltered here, Nathan corrected firmly. That's the difference between life and death in a mountain winter. While Rebecca continued tending to Peter's injury, Nathan efficiently built a fire, creating a large blaze that quickly warmed the cave. Adoit positioned himself near the entrance, maintaining his watch while keeping far enough away from the strangers to avoid further alarming them. As the warmth spread through the cave, some of the tension in the group eased. Jimmy began unpacking their meager supplies while Rebecca cleaned Peter's wound as thoroughly as possible with the materials available. Nathan disappeared for a moment, returning with a small pouch of dried herbs from his own supply. Boil this in water, he instructed Rebecca quietly. Make a poultice for the wound. Help fight infection. Rebecca recognized some of the herbs, though others were unfamiliar. Cherokee medicine, she guessed, recalling his earlier mention of learning from a Cherokee woman. Nathan nodded once. Blended with other knowledge. I've learned from many sources over the years. The simple statement hinted at a far broader history than he had previously revealed. As they worked together preparing the poultice, Rebecca noticed Jimmy was watching them with calculating interest, his earlier suspicion morphing into something more speculative. When Nathan moved to check on the horses, Jimmy approached Rebecca under the guise of helping care for his friend. Strange thing, finding a woman out here with a man like that, he remarked, lowering his voice. Is he your husband? No, Rebecca replied curtly, focusing on applying the poultice to Peter's wound. Mr. Holt helped me when the storm caught me on the way to Fort Harrison, just as he's helping you now. Jimmy's expression suggested he didn't entirely believe her explanation. Man lives alone in the mountains for years, suddenly has a woman in his cave. Seems convenient. Your implications are both misguided and ungrateful, Rebecca retorted, her tone turning noticeably colder. Especially when we're saving your lives while risking our own supplies during a scarce winter. The rebuke hit its mark, Jimmy flushing with embarrassment. No offense intended, ma'am, just trying to understand the situation. The situation is simple, Rebecca said firmly. We're all sheltering from a deadly storm. Once it passes and your friend can travel, we'll all continue on our separate journeys. Despite the confident statement, Rebecca felt a strange reluctance at the thought of returning to the Clearwater settlement after this ordeal. The forced proximity within the cave had created an unusual bond between her and Nathan Holt, a mutual respect between equals that she rarely experienced in the settlement, where her independence was viewed with suspicion rather than appreciation. After ensuring Peter was resting as comfortably as possible, his wound properly bandaged with the herbal poultice, Rebecca joined Nathan, who stood checking on her horses, in the back of the cave. They're in good condition, he remarked quietly. Wolf dogs chose well. This cave has everything they need. Thank you for keeping them safe, Rebecca replied with sincere gratitude. They represent most of what I own in this world. Nathan nodded, understanding the practical value of good horses on the frontier without further explanation. Your medical skills are impressive, he noted, changing the subject. Trapper might keep his leg thanks to your care. Combined with your medicine, Rebecca conceded. My knowledge comes mostly from books and James's army experience. Yours seems more directly acquired. Survival is an effective teacher, Nathan replied with characteristic understatement. His gaze shifted towards the cave entrance, where the gathering darkness had rendered the outside world invisible. storms changing intensity again. Listen. Rebecca stilled, focusing her attention as Nathan had taught her. After a moment, she discerned what he had already noticed. The pitch of the wind had altered, carrying more moisture and less ice in its sound. Turning back to snow from ice, she observed. Is that good or bad? Means the worst has passed for now. Temperatures rising slightly. Nathan's expression remained vigilant. But more snow creates new dangers. Deep drifts, hidden crevasses, slow-moving avalanches as the weight accumulates. How long before we can travel safely? Nathan considered the question with his usual thoroughness. Minimum 2 days. Your horses need proper trails, not deep snow. Injured man needs more time to recover. Rebecca glanced back at the trappers, lowering her voice even further. Do you trust them? Trust must be earned, Nathan replied simply. They pose no immediate threat while dependent on our help. Afterward, he shrugged slightly. People reveal their true nature when desperate, or when they believe they hold the power. You suspect they might come back for your cave once. They're healed? Rebecca had seen enough greed on the frontier to recognize the possibility. Some see the mountain as property to be seized, not a force to be respected. Nathan's blue eyes flashed with the steel forged from experience. If they make that mistake, the mountain will teach them a lesson. The quiet certainty in his voice wasn't a threat, but a statement of natural law as he understood it. Rebecca found herself nodding in agreement, sharing his perspective in a way that just days before would have seemed foreign to her. The settlement will grow increasingly worried, she said, turning back to more immediate concerns. My absence will be noticed after tomorrow. Nothing to be done about it now, Nathan replied pragmatically. When the weather permits, I'll help. Retrieve your wagon and guide you to the main trail. If these trappers are able to travel, they can accompany you towards Fort Harrison. The plan was logical enough, but Rebecca felt an unexpected reluctance at the thought of returning to the confining expectations of Clearwater. The limitations of frontier society, with its rigid expectations especially for women, seemed impossibly restrictive after experiencing the raw authenticity of the mountain wilderness. Their quiet conversation was interrupted by a soft sound from the cave entrance. Not a Dwight's movement, but something else. They both turned simultaneously and found Ghost standing just inside the entrance, its silver fur almost glowing in the firelight. The massive wolf surveyed the cave with regal appraisal, its amber eyes taking in the strangers before focusing on Nathan and Rebecca. Jimmy spotted the wolf and instinctively reached for his pistol. "Wolf!" he shouted in alarm, raising the weapon. "No!" Nathan and Rebecca yelled in unison, but their warning came too late. The pistol exploded with a deafening crack in the confined space of the cave, the sound echoing off the stone walls. Ghost moved with unbelievable speed, the bullet striking the rock where it had stood just a heartbeat before. The silver wolf vanished back into the night as quickly as it had appeared. Nathan moved with cold fury, closing the distance to Jimmy in 3 long strides. Before the trapper could react, Nathan disarmed him, wrenching the pistol from his hand with practiced skill. "Idiot," he said, his voice deadly quiet as he inspected the weapon before tucking it into his own belt. That wolf wasn't attacking, it was assessing the storm's progress. Jimmy recoiled, holding his hands up defensively. It was a goddamn wolf in the cave entrance. Any sane man would shoot. Any wise man would observe before acting, Rebecca countered, her own anger evident, as she moved to stand beside Nathan. That wolf has saved both our lives during this storm. It's no ordinary predator. Peter struggled to sit up despite his injury. Jimmy had a right to be careful, ma'am. Wolves are dangerous predators, especially in winter when game is scarce. Not this one, Nathan declared with utter certainty. Ghost has never attacked a human who respects the boundaries of the mountain. Ghost? Jimmy repeated skeptically. You named a wild wolf? It had that name before I came, Nathan replied, his posture gradually relaxing from battle readiness, though his eyes remained vigilant. Silver wolf, larger than natural, older than possible. Settlers whisper about it. Trappers tell stories around the fire. Recognition dawned on Peter's pain-etched face. The gray ghost, the wolf that can't be killed. He made a superstitious gesture. That's just mountain legend. No wolf lives 20 years or grows as big as a bear. Legends often contain truth, Rebecca found herself saying, echoing Nathan's earlier words. I've seen Ghost with my own eyes, seen it communicate with Mr. Holt. It helped save me from the path of the storm. Her defense of Ghost surprised even herself, but the words felt right as she spoke them. Over the past days, her understanding of the mountain and its inhabitants had shifted fundamentally, revealing laws and relationships invisible to those who only viewed the wilderness as a resource to be exploited. Jimmy looked between them, suspicion etched across his features. You both sound like you've got mountain madness. Wolves don't save people. They hunt them when they're hungry enough. Your ignorance is only surpassed by your poor judgment, Nathan retorted coldly, turning towards the cave entrance. Stay here, keep your friend warm. I'm going to find Ghost, make sure your stupidity hasn't hurt it. As Nathan moved towards the exit, Rebecca made a quick decision. I'm going with you, she said, already reaching for her coat. Nathan paused, studying her with that penetrating gaze. After a moment he nodded once, accepting her choice and acknowledging her right to make it. You can't be serious. Going out in a blizzard to look for a wolf? Jimmy protested. That's insane. Rebecca turned at the cave entrance, her expression resolute. What's truly insane is firing blindly at what you don't understand. Stay with your friend, Mr. Richardson. We'll be back when we've found Ghost. As they stepped out into the swirling snow, leaving the fire's warmth behind, Rebecca felt no fear despite the obvious dangers. Something had shifted inside her during this mountain ordeal, an awakening of instincts long suppressed by the constraints of civilization, a recognition of laws that spoke to something far deeper than rational thought. The night enveloped them, dark and perilous, yet alive with meaning to those who had learned how to listen. Nathan moved with silent certainty through the storm, and Rebecca followed, trusting not just the man but the mountain that had brought them together in such extraordinary circumstances. The night had transformed the mountain into a realm of shadows and whispers. The snow continued to fall, though less intensely than before, creating an ethereal landscape where sounds carried strangely. Rebecca followed Nathan through this altered world, trusting his instinctive understanding of the terrain, even when her own senses became disoriented by the surrounding whiteness. They moved uphill from the lower cave, following tracks that only Nathan seemed able to discern beneath the new snowfall. Adwat had joined them unbidden, the wolf dog running ahead and then circling back, communicating through subtle movements that Rebecca was beginning to understand as well as speech. Ghost is wounded, Nathan said after studying Adwait's behavior during one such return. His voice held the cold certainty of someone reading clear signs rather than making a guess. Rebecca's heart sank. How bad? Not life-threatening. Bullet grazed his flank. Nathan adjusted their direction slightly, heading towards a dense thicket of pines ahead. He'll be seeking shelter to assess the injury. The matter-of-fact way Nathan spoke about the wolf's reasoning didn't strike Rebecca as odd, but perfectly logical. After what she had witnessed over the past days, Ghost's intelligence and calculated decisions seemed as natural as the storm itself. Will it let us near if it's injured? She asked, practical concern overriding theoretical questions. Nathan's expression remained focused on their path. "It will allow me. As for you," he glanced at her briefly, "that depends on Ghost." They entered the pine thicket, where the interlocking branches created a sheltered space with significantly less snow accumulation. The ground here was covered in fallen pine needles rather than deep drifts, making travel easier but also more likely to generate noise. Nathan slowed his pace, gesturing for silence as they neared a fallen log that formed a natural windbreak within the thicket. Rebecca saw it first, the massive silver form of Ghost lying within the sheltered space behind the log, its amber eyes watching their approach with alert intelligence. Even injured, the wolf maintained a regal air, its head held high and its posture suggesting readiness to flee or fight if necessary. Nathan stopped at a respectful distance, emitting the low sounds Rebecca had heard him use before. Ghost's ears pricked, acknowledging the communication but not relinquishing its guarded position. A dark stain marred its silver fur just above its left flank, the bullet wound still seeping blood, though not severely enough to indicate a grave injury. "Stay here," Nathan instructed Rebecca softly. "Let it decide whether to accept your help." She nodded, remaining still and silent as Nathan slowly approached the wounded wolf, his body language conveying respect rather than threat. Ghost watched him approach, its eyes tracking every movement, but allowing Nathan to kneel beside it and gently examine the wound. "Clean graze," Nathan reported after careful assessment. "Painful but not deep. Bleeding has already started to slow." Rebecca released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Will it let me help? I have some cloth in my pack that can make a bandage." Nathan glanced at Ghost, a silent communication passing between them. After a moment he nodded. "Come closer, slowly. No sudden movements. Let it smell your hand before you touch it." Heart pounding with the extraordinary nature of the moment, Rebecca carefully stepped forward, Ghost's amber eyes fixed on her, unwavering and assessing. She recalled their first encounter on the trail, the way the massive wolf had deliberately herded her away from danger rather than treating her as prey. That memory gave her courage as she slowly extended her hand, palm down for the wolf to inspect. Ghost leaned forward slightly, its nostrils flaring as it inhaled her scent. Then, to Rebecca's utter astonishment, it deliberately nudged its muzzle against her fingers, a gesture of acceptance that seemed impossibly knowing for a wild animal. "It remembers you saved it from the trapper's second shot," Nathan observed quietly. "Recognizes you chose its safety over shelter." Rebecca knelt beside Nathan, carefully retrieving the clean cloth from her coat pocket. With gentle movements, she helped Nathan bandage the wound. Ghost remained perfectly still throughout the process, despite what must have been considerable pain. "I've never experienced anything like this," she whispered, overwhelmed by the significance of the moment. "It's as if it understands everything. It understands more than most humans give it credit for," Nathan replied. "Not with words, but with intention and consequence." With the bandaging complete, Ghost rose fluidly to its feet, testing the bandage with a slight flex of its injured flank. Evidently satisfied, it regarded them both with that uncanny intelligence before silently moving towards the edge of the pine thicket. "Is it leaving?" Rebecca asked, surprised by the abrupt departure. Nathan shook his head, leading the way. "It wants us to follow." Without questioning how Nathan knew this, Rebecca fell into step. The brief respite in the sheltered thicket had somewhat restored her energy, and curiosity about Ghost's intentions outweighed her awareness of the cold and fatigue. They followed the silver wolf along a winding path around the hillside rather than returning directly to either of the caves. Ghost moved purposefully, pausing occasionally to ensure they remained in contact through the swirling snow. After nearly half an hour of travel, the terrain began to look familiar to Rebecca. They were nearing the location where she had first encountered Nathan and the wolf pack, where her wagon had been left stranded beside the fallen tree. "It's taking us back to your wagon," Nathan confirmed, reading her recognition. "But why at this hour?" Ghost had stopped ahead, its silver fur a clear marker against the black outline of Rebecca's abandoned wagon. As they drew closer, Rebecca noticed something different. The fallen tree that had blocked the trail had been partially cleared, with a passage now wide enough for the wagon to pass through with careful maneuvering. "The road's clear," she remarked in surprise. "But how? That tree was enormous." Nathan studied the scene with narrowed eyes. "Not cleared by human hands. Look at the breaks, that's avalanche damage. Recent slides must have shifted this part of the mountain." The implications weren't lost on Rebecca, meaning we potentially could retrieve the wagon and continue on to Fort Harrison once the storm fully breaks? "Potentially," Nathan agreed, though his tone remained cautious. "Depends on conditions elsewhere on the trail. One obstacle cleared doesn't mean the entire path is safe." Ghost watched them from beside the wagon, its posture conveying expectation, as if it had deliberately brought them here to witness this development. When Nathan approached to inspect the wagon more closely, the wolf moved to block him, directing his attention instead to the cargo area covered by Rebecca's tarpaulin. "It wants us to check your goods," Nathan translated, following Ghost's lead. Together, they unfastened the frozen tarpaulin, revealing Rebecca's trade goods largely intact. Despite the storm's fury, however, partially buried beneath the new snow at the edge of the wagon was something that hadn't been there before. A man's satchel, made of poor quality leather with a distinctive brass clasp. Nathan lifted it carefully, examining the clasp, with recognition. "This belongs to one of the trappers. See this mark? Standard issue for Hudson Bay Company tenderfoots." Rebecca's mind raced with the implications. "They were here before we found them. They discovered my wagon, and instead of protecting it or marking its location for the owner, they ransacked it for valuables," Nathan finished, opening the satchel to reveal a small assortment of items clearly pilfered from Rebecca's trade goods: carved bone buttons, a precious packet of tea, and a small silver pendant evidently intended for trade with the native tribes. The stark truth hit Rebecca with unexpected force. While she had been sleeping safely in Nathan's cave, these men had been looting her hard-earned goods, not out of desperate need, but simply out of opportunity. "They lied to us," she said, anger rising as she grasped the broader implications. "Peter's story about the injury? Probably true, but incomplete," Nathan assessed, his expression hardening. "The trap likely caught him, but they were up here before, setting illegal snares within territory they knew belonged to others." "How can you be sure?" Nathan gestured towards the far side of the clearing. "Their tracks from before the heavy snowfall. They've been ranging around this area extensively, setting snares in a manner that violates standard mountain practice. No responsible trapper would block game trails or set snares near water sources used by multiple species. These men are not just inexperienced, they are deliberately exploitative." The evidence was hard to dispute, but something still puzzled Rebecca. "But why would Ghost want us to discover this now? What purpose does it serve when we've already offered them shelter and medical care?" Nathan's expression shifted, understanding dawning. "Because it's warning us. These aren't just foolish greenhorns," Rebecca finished, the strategic implications becoming clear. "They are deliberately destructive, and once Peter's leg is well enough to travel, they likely won't leave with gratitude. They've already proven they'll take what isn't theirs," Nathan murmured. "My cave, my stores. Ghost is protecting the balance of the mountain, as it always has," Rebecca realized, "including those who respect that balance." The silver wolf watched them with steady amber eyes, the intelligence behind them now undeniable to Rebecca. This wasn't a mere animal, but a conscious guardian of the wilderness, making calculated decisions at every turn, from herding her away from danger to revealing the trapper's true nature before it threatened Nathan's sanctuary. "We need to get back to the cave," Rebecca decided, clutching the satchel of stolen goods as evidence. "Deal with this situation before it escalates further." Nathan nodded in agreement, but as they prepared to leave, Ghost unexpectedly moved to block their path. The wolf stood directly in front of Rebecca, its massive body preventing her from taking the path back to the lower cave. "It doesn't want us to go back there," Nathan translated, studying Ghost's behavior with intense focus. "Not yet." "Then where?" Rebecca started before understanding dawned. "Your cave. It wants us to go to your primary dwelling instead of the other one." Nathan considered this, trust in Ghost's judgment evident in his expression. "Safer location, multiple exits if needed, and the trappers are unaware of its existence." The strategic advantage was clear. From Nathan's primary cave, they could observe and plan without the trappers' knowledge, approaching the situation from a more secure position. "Lead the way," Rebecca agreed, looking at Ghost with newfound respect. The return journey through the blizzard-transformed landscape took even longer than their descent, the terrain becoming increasingly challenging as they climbed higher. Rebecca found herself drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't realized she possessed, her determination fueled by the need to address the potential threat the trappers represented. When they finally reached the hidden entrance to Nathan's cave, Rebecca experienced an unexpected sensation, a feeling of returning to safety, to a place that felt almost like home. The familiar narrow passage welcomed them with the promise of warmth and security, a stark contrast to the icy wilderness outside. Inside, Chetan and Maska greeted them with reserved enthusiasm, clearly sensing the gravity of their return. The fire had burned low but still maintained, quickly restored to vigorous warmth by Nathan's practiced hand. Ghost entered last, shaking the snow from its fur before settling down near the entrance, the posture of a sentinel assuming its post. As the warmth returned to her limbs, Rebecca regrouped her thoughts regarding their situation. "We need a plan for when we go back to the lower cave," she said, practicality overriding exhaustion. "The trappers don't know we've discovered their theft." Nathan nodded, adding wood to the rekindled fire. "Gives us an advantage. I need to secure my stores there before confronting them. Limit their access to resources if the situation turns hostile." "You think it could come to violence?" Rebecca asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Thieves who are being helped rarely show gratitude. When confronted," Nathan replied simply, "but addressing them directly prevents greater trouble later. Otherwise, they might return with others when spring arrives." The logic was sound. Better to deal with the potential threat now, while it was contained and predictable, than allow it to fester into something more dangerous later. Rebecca had seen similar situations play out in the Clearwater settlement, where tolerance of minor offenses often encouraged troublemakers to attempt more serious transgressions. "We'll go at first light," she decided. "Present the evidence, retrieve my goods, and make our expectations clear." Nathan studied her with renewed appraisal. "You've handled situations like this before?" Rebecca gave a wry smile. "A lone woman on the frontier learns to deal with problems directly before they get worse. Showing weakness only invites exploitation." For the first time since they had met, Nathan's face shifted into what might have been a genuine smile, brief, but transforming his weathered features. "The mountain chose well when it placed you in Ghost's path. The simple statement carried a weight far beyond its words, an acknowledgement of something that had been building between them through this shared ordeal, a mutual respect that transcended ordinary frontier alliances. They spent the remaining hours planning their approach, sharing tactics with the ease of seasoned partners rather than recent acquaintances. Throughout their discussion, Rebecca found herself increasingly reluctant to contemplate eventually returning to the Clearwater settlement. The limitations of frontier society, with its rigid expectations especially for women, seemed impossibly confining after experiencing the raw authenticity of the mountain wilderness. As dawn neared, bringing a temporary lull in the storm, Rebecca voiced a decision that had been forming in her mind ever since Ghost had first led the wolf pack to intervene in her journey. "After we deal with the trappers and the weather's clear enough to travel," she said carefully, "I don't think I'm going back to Clearwater permanently." Nathan looked up from the arrows he was preparing, his blue eyes showing neither surprise nor judgment. "The settlement is your home." "It's where I've been living," Rebecca corrected. "But this mountain has shown me something different, a kind of freedom I've been searching for without fully understanding what I was looking for. Mountains demand a great deal from those who choose them," Nathan observed, though his tone carried no discouragement. "Winters are harsh. Isolation tests even the strongest spirits. I'm not proposing living entirely as you do," Rebecca clarified. "But perhaps there's a path in between, a trading post at the edge of the mountains, serving as a connection between the wilderness and the settlements, without fully belonging to either world." The idea had crystallized throughout their ordeal, a vision of establishing a place where different worlds could meet on equal terms, where the wisdom of the mountain could be translated to those still bound by the limitations of civilization. "Fort Harrison has needed a reliable outpost on this side of the mountains for years," she continued, growing excited by the concept. "With my contacts there and in Clearwater, plus my established wagon trade routes." Nathan considered her words with characteristic thoroughness, neither dismissing nor immediately embracing the proposal. "Such a place would need to be protected," he finally observed. "The wrong kind of attention could disrupt the balance of the mountain." "That's why it needs people who understand both worlds," Rebecca countered. "Someone who values the wilderness, for its own sake, not just for what can be taken from it." Their eyes met across the fire, a silent understanding passing between them. This wasn't a romantic overture in the conventional sense, but something more fundamental. The recognition of kindred spirits who had found in each other complementary strengths and shared values. Ghost raised its massive head from where it had been resting, its amber eyes reflecting the firelight as it regarded them both with an air of almost uncanny approval. The great wolf had brought them together through what had seemed like chance, but increasingly felt like purpose. The wisdom of the mountain acting through its most ancient guardian. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the cave's hidden ventilation shafts, Rebecca and Nathan prepared to face the immediate challenges ahead, confronting the trappers, retrieving her wagon, and navigating the blizzard-transformed landscape. Yet beneath these practical concerns lay something far deeper, the foundation of a new path that neither had foreseen when the winter storm first approached Whispering Pine Valley. The wilderness had tested them both, separately and together, and in that testing had revealed possibilities that extended beyond the ordinary boundaries of frontier existence. Whatever came next would be neither entirely wild nor entirely civilized, but something new, a bridge between worlds that honored the wisdom of the mountain while providing sanctuary for those who sought to understand its deeper truths. Rebecca Walker had set out from the Clearwater settlement merely to find supplies before winter closed the mountain passes. Instead, she found her true direction when a wolf pack attacked her wagon and a silent mountain man appeared alongside his pack. It wasn't the end of her journey, but the beginning of a path she didn't even know she was seeking, until the mountain showed her the way. Their story has only just begun. How will Rebecca and Nathan deal with the dangerous trappers? Will a trading post at the edge of the mountains actually become a reality? And what role will the gray ghost play in their future? Let us know your predictions in the comments below. If you're captivated by this adventure of survival, mystery, and tough choices, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next thrilling installment of Whispering Pine Valley. And be sure to check out the other compelling stories waiting for you on our channel.